The scene opens in the tense, hushed environment of the New York County Supreme Court, Manhattan, where a legal battle of impossible stakes is about to begin. Alara Vance, 40s, sharp, designer suit, radiating cold, calculated confidence, stands across the crowded hallway, her posture rigid and her eyes fixed with an unnerving intensity on Jake Marshall, 38, tired, honest face, wearing a slightly too tight suit, and the small, beaming Lilly, 6, his daughter. Alara is the epitome of untouchable wealth, evidenced by the multimillion-dollar retainer her high-powered legal team carries, and the contrast with Jake, a simple delivery driver from Queens, is a visual gut punch designed to elicit immediate audience sympathy and rage against the unfairness of the world. She makes a subtle, dismissive gesture to her lawyer, indicating that this entire proceeding is a mere formality, a transaction where money will inevitably triumph over simple human connection. And this silent display of power establishes the central injustice right from the start, leaving the viewer desperately wanting to see her fail. The camera lingers on Lily's innocent, trusting hand clutching Jake's, emphasizing what is truly at risk, not property, but a pure, unshakable bond. Jake senses the silent, cold judgment from across the room and pulls Lilly closer, a primal, defensive action that betrays his internal fear, though he tries hard to project a calm he doesn't feel. But he had no idea this was only the beginning of a harrowing ordeal that would force him to confront not just this powerful adversary, but also the long-buried circumstances of how Lilly came into his life, a past shrouded in secrecy and pain that he had desperately tried to forget. This initial confrontation is not just about custody. It's the collision of two completely different worlds, one built on struggle and love, the other on limitless resources and dark secrets, and the viewer is instantly trapped in the moral dilemma of who truly deserves this child. The setting shifts abruptly to the cramped, but meticulously clean, basement apartment in Astoria, Queens, where Jake lives with Lilly, a space that is a testament to his tireless efforts to create warmth and stability, out of very little, clearly illustrating his dedication as a single father. The clock on the wall reads 4 a.m., and Jake is already moving, not sluggishly, but with the practiced efficiency of a man who knows every minute counts, as he quietly prepares Lily's breakfast and school lunch before his arduous shift as a last-mile delivery driver begins. He checks his delivery route map on his aging phone, the illuminated screen displaying a chaotic web of addresses stretching across the boroughs, a daily grind that requires him to be on the road for 12 grueling hours, constantly battling traffic and the relentless pressure of tight deadlines, a life devoid of luxury but rich in purpose. He carefully packs a small, personalized note into Lily's lunchbox, a simple habit that serves as his small, daily anchor to her world, a reminder of why he pushes himself past exhaustion every single day. The worn-out soles of his work boots and the faded logo on his company uniform are physical symbols of his daily sacrifice and his enduring struggle against the rising cost of living in New York City, where a single missed shift could mean the difference between paying the rent and facing eviction. He quietly kisses Lilly goodbye while she is still peacefully asleep, his heart aching slightly at the separation, the weight of being her sole provider pressing heavily on his shoulders. At that moment, everything started to change, though he didn't realize it, because the simple, repetitive nature of his difficult routine was about to be shattered by an event so monumental and unpredictable that it would redefine his entire existence, proving that even the most ordinary lives can be turned upside down in an instant. As Jake navigates the pre-dawn traffic of the BQE, Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, his mind drifts back, as it often does in the quiet hours, to the raw, silent pain of his past. The deep, unresolved grief stemming from the loss of his high school sweetheart and fiancée, Sarah, who tragically passed away in a sudden accident years before Lilly came into his life. He avoids thinking about the specifics, compartmentalizing the memories, but the ache remains, a persistent, dull throb that informs his solitary life and his protective devotion to Lilly, realizing that his capacity for love and sacrifice was forged in the fire of that earlier, devastating loss. He remembers the future they had meticulously planned. A small house in upstate New York, 2 children, and a life built on mutual support and simple dreams. A future that was violently snatched away, leaving him adrift and carrying a guilt he could never fully articulate. A small, faded picture of Sarah, tucked inside his work wallet, is the only tangible remnant of that almost life, and he touches the worn leather instinctively, a silent promise that he will live a life worthy of the second chance he feels he was given with Lilly. This deep emotional well of past suffering explains his profound empathy and resilience, making him the perfect, flawed hero for this story. The memory of Sarah's infectious laugh and her boundless optimism is a cruel counterpoint to the quiet desperation of his current reality, a stark reminder of what he lost and what he fights to protect now. He shakes his head, forcibly pulling himself back to the present and the urgent demands of his job, but the bittersweet memory always leaves a residue of melancholy. What happened next would shock everyone, because the quiet, persistent pain he carried was unknowingly preparing him for the unimaginable burden and moral test that was rapidly approaching, a test that would demand every ounce of the emotional strength he had meticulously built up over the years of silent suffering. The day begins to feel subtly off for Jake, an inexplicable shift in the predictable rhythm of his delivery route in the affluent neighborhood of Park Slope, Brooklyn, where he rarely ventures, indicating a deviation from his normal, monotonous schedule. A persistent, slightly garbled radio message from his dispatcher, Jessica, about a last-minute, non-standard delivery assignment to an obscure, rarely used service entrance of an old brownstone repeatedly cuts out, making him feel uneasy and pushing him far beyond his scheduled timeframe, creating a sense of growing ambient tension. He notices a luxury black sedan, with tinted windows and diplomatic-style plates, seemingly following him for several blocks, stopping and starting as he does, a presence that feels both out of place and oddly threatening in the quiet residential area, raising his internal alarm bells, though he tries to dismiss it as coincidence. Furthermore, the address he is heading toward is listed as urgent, high priority, a designation unheard of for his usual consignment of small to medium packages, an anomaly that screams of a deviation from standard operating procedure and a setup for something completely unexpected. As he pulls up to the designated location, a chilling gust of wind and a momentary blackout of the streetlights, despite it being midday, feel like a cinematic premonition, an environmental cue that the universe itself is signaling a major change is imminent. He checks his watch, realizing he's running critically late for Lily's school pickup, and this rush adds a frantic undercurrent to the unfolding weirdness, forcing his attention away from the subtle signs he is desperately trying to ignore. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The strange occurrences of the morning were not random glitches, but the universe slowly opening the curtain on the central conflict of his life, a confrontation that had been set in motion long before he was even aware of the strange package he was about to deliver. Jake finally locates the obscure service entrance, a shadowy, poorly lit alcove behind the stately brownstone, and as he approaches, the air is thick with a strange, unnatural silence that seems to absorb the usual city noise, amplifying his sense of dread. He finds a heavy, oversized canvas bag, not the small parcel he expected, placed conspicuously by a large, ornate metal gate, seemingly abandoned with a casual disregard that is shocking for such an exclusive neighborhood, and there is no one in sight to sign for the package, which is the first major breach of his company's strict protocols. Hesitantly, he reaches down to check the weight, finding it far heavier and denser than any package he has ever handled. And as his fingers brush the coarse material, he notices a small, almost imperceptible movement from inside, followed by a faint, muffled sound that is undeniably organic and deeply unsettling. Overcoming his professional conditioning, he quickly unzips the top of the bag, and the sight within freezes him completely. Nestled amongst thick, expensive blankets is an infant, no more than a few days old, eyes tightly shut, but alive and breathing, a truly shocking discovery that instantly transforms his mundane delivery route into a life-altering emergency. The sheer shock of finding an abandoned baby in a bag on the street in one of the wealthiest parts of New York City hits him with the force of a physical blow, replacing his fear with a profound, almost paternal surge of protectiveness, immediately prioritizing the welfare of the child over his job, his schedule, or his own safety. He frantically looks around, desperately searching for any sign of a parent, a note, or an explanation, but the street remains hauntingly empty, reinforcing the undeniable truth that this innocent life has been deliberately and ruthlessly discarded. At that moment, everything started to change, because the unexpected encounter was not just a detour in his day, but the abrupt, violent introduction of the central mystery and moral test that would consume his life for the next 6 years, forever altering the path he was on. Point 6. The resistance before helping panic sets in. A cold, rational fear fighting against the immediate, overwhelming impulse to scoop the baby up and run. As Jake is instantly and terrifyingly aware of the catastrophic legal and professional implications of the situation. He knows with grim certainty that taking an abandoned child would be seen as kidnapping, and the police, with their impersonal bureaucratic lens, would instantly suspect him, the working-class delivery driver, rather than the wealthy residents of the brownstone, a clear and immediate example of the systemic injustice he constantly battles. He pulls out his phone, his hand shaking violently, ready to dial 911, the only correct and legal course of action, but a wave of profound distrust of the system washes over him, fueled by years of seeing how the poor and desperate are treated by authorities, and he hesitates, his thumb hovering over the call button. He looks down at the tiny, fragile face, and the infant lets out a small, weak cry, a sound of utter vulnerability that bypasses all his logic and rational fear, appealing directly to the deep, wounded core of his paternal instincts. The thought of that baby spending hours in the impersonal, potentially overwhelmed foster care system, or worse, the trauma of police processing, creates an unbearable vision of suffering that he, a man who knows loss, cannot stomach. He takes a deep, ragged breath, momentarily wrestling with the moral and legal consequences of his choice, fully aware that choosing the baby means choosing a path of extreme personal risk and potential ruin. But the memory of his own past isolation hardens his resolve. What happened next would shock everyone, because in that moment of acute, agonizing hesitation, Jake made a decision that defied all caution and reason, choosing compassion and immediate human protection over the cold, impersonal dictates of the law, a choice that sealed his destiny and set him on a collision course with the powerful forces that had abandoned the child. With a sudden, decisive intake of breath, Jake shoves his phone back into his pocket, the decision made in a flash of moral clarity that overruled the instinct for self-preservation, recognizing that the baby needed immediate, unconditional care, not the slow, often traumatic processing of the state. He meticulously gathers the infant, wrapping her carefully in the softest part of the expensive blanket found in the bag, holding her close to his chest to share his body heat, the small, trusting weight against him instantly solidifying his commitment to protect her, a silent adoption enacted on a lonely Brooklyn sidewalk. He knows he cannot simply drive away. He must create a story, a believable cover that will protect him and, more importantly, protect the baby from being immediately separated from him by suspicious authorities who would question the highly irregular circumstances of the find. He quickly snaps a blurry photo of the bag and the location as the only shred of evidence for his future defense, a desperate measure of a man already planning his survival in an impossible situation. He looks back at the empty street, a silent promise forming in his mind. This child, whom he immediately names Lilly, will never feel the cold, brutal hand of abandonment again, a vow that stems directly from the pain he carries from losing Sarah. This commitment is the true turning point of the story, transforming him from a simple delivery man into a clandestine guardian, willing to risk everything for an unknown infant. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The act of choosing to help was not the end of a dilemma, but the opening of a treacherous road, fraught with legal jeopardy and hidden enemies, ensuring that his life would never be simple again and that his selfless act would be repaid with a world of escalating, undeserved trouble. Point 8. The first negative consequence, the immediate, brutal consequence of Jake's decision slams into him the moment he returns to his small apartment, hours late for his afternoon delivery shift and, critically, missing Lily's, his first Lilly, the original name for the baby, later changed school pickup, an unforgivable offense in his structured, time-sensitive life. He receives a furious, aggressive call from his dispatcher, Jessica, who is already dealing with a mountain of customer complaints due to his no-show and delayed routes, her voice laced with the kind of professional disappointment that is a direct threat to his financial stability. He attempts a vague, half-truth explanation about a massive traffic accident and an urgent personal matter, but his shaky voice and the clear fabrication of his story do nothing to convince her, only increasing her suspicion and confirming her belief that he is becoming an unreliable employee. The first official reprimand is severe. A full day's pay docked and a written warning that puts him squarely on the path to termination. a consequence that feels like a punch to the gut, threatening the very security he desperately needs to provide for the newborn. The pressure of caring for a newborn, the unexpected costs, the lack of supplies, the need for immediate, professional childcare, is an avalanche of financial stress layered on top of his professional jeopardy. And he realizes with sickening clarity that the life he chose for Lilly, the baby, is already beginning to crumble under the weight of his moral choice. This immediate, palpable loss of income highlights the cruel irony of the situation. His act of profound human kindness has immediately made him less capable of providing a stable life. At that moment, everything started to change because the world had already begun to punish him for doing the right thing, setting up a continuous pattern of injustice where his good intentions are systematically misinterpreted and penalized, instantly connecting his moral heroism with tangible, negative real-world consequences. Within the span of a single, agonizing week, Jake's life spirals into a controlled chaos, a terrifying cascade of problems directly resulting from his brave, but illegal, decision to keep the baby. His carefully constructed network of support, which was already fragile, starts to fray under the relentless pressure. He has to call in sick repeatedly to deal with the demands of the colicky newborn, burning through all his accumulated sick days and earning him a hostile, final warning from his boss. The rent is due, and the deducted pay from his reprimand leaves him critically short, forcing him to make the humiliating choice between buying formula for Lilly, the baby, and paying the electricity bill, a decision that underscores his desperation and the harsh reality of poverty. The biggest blow comes when his elderly, kind-hearted neighbor, amidst, Chan, who used to watch Lilly, the original Lilly, after school, develops a deep, unexplained suspicion about the sudden appearance of the new baby, questioning Jake with thinly veiled hostility and abruptly withdrawing her childcare support, leaving him completely scrambling and isolated. He finds himself selling off small, cherished possessions, Sarah's old guitar, his only decent watch, at a local pawn shop just to cover the skyrocketing expense of infant supplies, a painful, tangible sacrifice that symbolizes the erosion of his past and the terrifying instability of his present. The constant stress and lack of sleep manifest physically, making him irritable and clumsy, leading to minor mistakes at work that further solidify his reputation as a liability, not a reliable employee. What happened next would shock everyone, because the slow crumble of his world was not just bad luck. It was the subtle, powerful resistance of a system and a society unprepared for genuine, radical selflessness, ensuring that his path to stability would be paved with escalating financial and emotional pain. Point 10. Public humiliation. The lowest point arrives publicly and painfully during a tense, mandatory meeting at his delivery company's Queens Depot, a cavernous, dirty warehouse where all the drivers and dispatchers are present, the perfect stage for his humiliation. His boss, Mr. Henderson, a gruff, unforgiving man who prioritizes profit over people, singles Jake out, reading his multiple disciplinary warnings aloud to the entire room, painting him as a lazy, irresponsible time waster and a liability to the entire operation. The shame is crushing, but the worst part is the open, visible skepticism and contempt from his coworkers, who whisper and exchange knowing glances, believing he is using fabricated excuses and personal problems to avoid work, compounding his professional failure with deep, personal rejection. Henderson then hands him a final, punitive assignment: the worst, most congested route in Manhattan, with an impossible deadline and the threat of immediate public termination if he fails. Jake attempts to defend himself, his voice cracking slightly as he alludes vaguely to an unforeseen family emergency. But the vague reference only strengthens Henderson's conviction that Jake is lying, and his words are drowned out by the cynical laughter and jeers of the other drivers who see him as weak. This public shaming is a calculated, devastating attack on his professional identity and his fragile self-worth, making him feel completely isolated and scrutinized. But he had no idea this was only the beginning, because the true, agonizing test of his moral character was not the simple public disgrace, but the deeper, more profound decision he would have to make in the face of absolute material collapse, a choice that would determine if the baby he saved would become the reason for his total downfall. Just as Jake sits alone in a dingy diner booth after his humiliating workday, staring blankly at a cold, uneaten plate of fries, the atmosphere shifts with the entrance of a new, enigmatic character. Simone Reed, 30s, sharp, impeccably dressed in understated but clearly expensive clothes, with an intensely observant gaze that misses nothing. She slides into the booth opposite him without invitation, her presence immediately commanding and unsettling, carrying a subtle, unfamiliar perfume that contrasts sharply with the stale air of the diner, and she is clearly not from this world. She speaks softly, but her words carry the weight of intimate knowledge, revealing that she knows about his job loss, the new baby, the impossible financial strain, and, most disturbingly, she alludes vaguely to the package he found behind the brownstone, a detail he has shared with absolutely no one, instantly transforming her from a random stranger into a figure of deep, complex mystery. Simone makes an immediate, highly unusual offer. She provides him with an envelope containing enough cash to cover his rent and infant supplies for 3 months. No questions asked, only stating cryptically that she is investing in a good man who did the right thing. This unexpected, almost magical relief is intensely tempting but also deeply suspicious, immediately raising red flags that this is a form of payment or a highly conditional debt. At that moment, everything started to change, because the arrival of Simone marks the transition from his personal struggle into a much larger, more dangerous plot, introducing an external, unknown force that is either an angel or a predator. And Jake is left in a profound state of doubt, unable to reconcile her wealth and knowledge with her seemingly benevolent intentions. Jake is thrown into a state of profound psychological turmoil, unable to reconcile the sudden, unsolicited financial aid from Simone with the deep-seated distrust he feels towards anyone offering too good to be true solutions, especially those connected to the upper echelon of the city he barely understands. He inspects the envelope Simone left, which contains perfectly crisp, sequentially numbered $100 bills, further fueling his paranoia that this is not a simple loan but potentially money involved in illegal activities, making him an accessory without his consent. His attempts to track down Simone prove futile. The phone number she gave him leads to a disconnected line, and the exclusive address she vaguely mentioned yields no trace of anyone matching her description, suggesting she is either incredibly discreet or actively hiding her true identity, amplifying the shadowy nature of her involvement. The cash, while a lifesaver, sits on his kitchen table like a toxic, beautiful burden, forcing him to choose between the moral high ground and the immediate survival of Lilly, a dilemma that preys on his sleep. He starts seeing the black luxury sedan from before, the one that seemed to follow him, parked several blocks from his apartment, suggesting that Simone's investment is not passive but involves active surveillance, making him feel like a pawn in a game he doesn't know the rules of. This increasing confusion and sense of being watched elevate the story's mystery and tension, forcing the audience to constantly question Simone's motives alongside Jake. What happened next would shock everyone, because the mysterious woman's generosity was not a gift of simple charity, but a carefully deployed component of a much larger, more complex scheme, designed not just to help him survive, but to position him exactly where she needed him for the next phase of her secret plan. The financial reprieve provided by Simone's anonymous cash infusion offers Jake a temporary, intoxicating taste of stability and security, a sensation he hasn't felt since before he found Lilly, allowing him to pay the overdue rent and stock up on high-quality formula and diapers, significantly easing the intense pressure he was under. He uses the breathing room to finally focus on his daughter, spending a blissful, guilt-free weekend with Lilly, taking her to the local Queens Museum, watching her delight in the massive panorama of the city of New York, a simple, wholesome scene that highlights the purity of their bond and offers a much-needed emotional palate cleanser for the audience. The baby, Lilly Vance, also seems healthier and happier, thriving under the consistent care and the stress-free environment, leading Jake to believe that, perhaps, his reckless decision was divinely guided and that the worst of his ordeal is over, a moment of false hope designed to lull both him and the viewer into a momentary, dangerous complacency. This brief period of peace is crucial for the narrative, allowing the audience to fully appreciate what Jake has to lose and how much he deserves happiness, making the inevitable, subsequent collapse all the more painful and shocking. He even manages to send a small, hopeful email to his former boss, Mr. Henderson, offering to take any available part-time work, feeling confident that he can slowly rebuild his life and professional reputation now that the immediate crisis has passed. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The calm was merely the eye of the storm, and the deceptive relief was a necessary plot mechanism designed to give him just enough stability to be utterly devastated by the new, far more insidious wave of injustice that was already gathering on the horizon, ready to strike when he was least prepared. Point 14. New, even greater injustice. The short-lived tranquility is brutally shattered by a legal document served to him by a stone-faced process server. A formal notice of impending legal action regarding the custody of the now-named Lilly, citing gross negligence and unfit parental conditions. A completely baseless but terrifying legal assault orchestrated by an unseen, powerful entity. The document outlines a highly damaging, distorted version of his life. His job loss is portrayed as consistent unreliability, the temporary financial aid as suspicious, undeclared income, and the fact that he has no official adoption paperwork is weaponized to paint him as a kidnapper, fundamentally turning his heroic act of rescue into a crime. The most devastating part is the demand for a temporary restraining order, seeking to immediately remove Lilly from his care pending a full custody hearing. A direct, aggressive threat to the very core of his existence, and the legal papers cite the potential biological mother, revealing for the first time that Vance is his adversary, an opponent with unlimited resources. The shock of being sued by a complete stranger, who he now recognizes as the cold woman he briefly saw near the brownstone, for a child he saved and raised, is overwhelming, a profound sense of injustice that the audience will share immediately and intensely. He frantically calls a legal aid line, but the intake counselor advises him that the case, given the challenger's resources and the lack of official documentation, looks extremely difficult to defend, immediately placing him at a severe, almost insurmountable disadvantage. At that moment, everything started to change, because this new, sophisticated attack was not a minor setback. It was a full-scale legal war launched by an adversary he could not possibly defeat alone, confirming that the mysterious abandonment of Lilly was not an accident but a planned event with long-term, devastating consequences for him. The immediate fallout of the legal injunction is swift, brutal, and designed to cripple Jake's defense before the case even begins. Due to the vague but serious allegations of unfit environment in the court documents, Child Protective Services, CPS, conducts a surprise, highly intrusive home visit, their judgment already clouded by the powerful influence of Alara's legal team, leading to a temporary and devastating ruling. Despite the clean apartment and Jake's clear devotion, the CPS caseworker, focused solely on the lack of official paperwork and Jake's unstable employment status, deems the environment high risk, and a temporary court order is issued that removes Lilly from his care and places her in a court-appointed foster home, shattering their bond in a single, gut-wrenching moment. The scene of the caseworker gently but firmly taking Lilly away, Jake's agonizing protestations falling on deaf ears, is the emotional climax of his loss. A pure, unadulterated moment of tragic helplessness that is intended to make the audience weep. Furthermore, the news of the CPS involvement and the impending custody battle immediately reaches his landlord, who, fearing legal complications and the involvement of the police, serves Jake with an eviction notice, citing a breach of lease terms concerning undisclosed occupants and legal disturbances, leaving him not only childless but also homeless. Jake is left completely alone in his empty apartment, the silence where Lilly's laughter used to be as deafening, surrounded by the remnants of his failed life. Her small bed, her toys, a tangible landscape of total loss. What happened next would shock everyone because this complete material and emotional devastation was the absolute lowest point, the moment of total collapse that was secretly intended to break him, testing his moral resolve and setting the stage for the crucial, unexpected turning point that would either save him or condemn him forever. Point 16. The near despair, the darkness descends completely as Jake finds himself sleeping in his beat-up Ford delivery van, parked discreetly in a quiet corner of a park in Astoria, the cold New York night seeping into the thin blankets, a physical manifestation of his utter despair and failure. He spends his days haunting the periphery of the court-appointed foster home, stealing brief, agonizing glimpses of Lilly being walked in the garden, unable to interact, the proximity to her only amplifying the pain of separation and his crippling sense of inadequacy. As he realizes his best intentions led to this devastating outcome. He drinks too much cheap coffee and smokes too many cigarettes, his focus completely gone, the will to fight slowly eroding under the constant, overwhelming pressure of the legal system he can't afford to fight, facing the reality that Vance's money and power have effectively crushed him. He considers, for a fleeting, desperate moment, giving up the fight, signing the papers, and allowing Lilly to go to the wealthy woman, believing she could at least offer the child the security and material comfort he couldn't provide, a thought born of selfless love mixed with utter defeat. This moment of near despair is critical, showing the audience the true emotional toll of the injustice and making his eventual resurgence even more powerful. He stares blankly at the crumpled legal aid pamphlet, feeling utterly defeated, the energy required to simply survive another day feeling like an impossible burden. But he had no idea this was only the beginning, because the universe, or perhaps the mysterious forces at play, had not finished with him, and the final piece of his shattered life was about to be rearranged by a simple, unexpected gesture that would force him to reclaim his fighting spirit and show the world the true depth of his dedication. Just as Jake is preparing to concede defeat, drafting a desperate, tear-stained note to his pro bono lawyer expressing his willingness to surrender, a small, profound gesture breaks through the thick fog of his despair, a moment of pure, unexpected humanity. He receives a small, anonymous package delivered to his former apartment's general delivery box, a crudely drawn crayon picture from Lilly, secretly delivered by a kind-hearted neighbor who had seen the whole CPS ordeal, depicting him, Lilly, and a small, smiling son, with the simple, misspelled words, "Daddy, come home." This tiny, physical reminder of their bond and Lily's unwavering love for him acts like a defibrillator to his dying hope, instantly snapping him out of his self-pity and reminding him that the fight is no longer about his ego or his past failures, but about the heart of an innocent child. The sheer effort and risk Lilly took to get this message to him, combined with the kindness of the neighbor, makes him realize he is not as alone as he felt, and the realization that his daughter is fighting for him reignites a desperate, fierce resolve to fight for her. He carefully tucks the drawing into his wallet, replacing Sarah's picture, recognizing that the past must now give way to the urgent demands of the present. At that moment, everything started to change, because the small gesture was the catalyst he needed, transforming his quiet resignation back into a burning, aggressive determination, prompting him to stop mourning his losses and start actively searching for the key to defeating Vance and reclaiming the life that was unjustly stolen from him. Fueled by the renewed hope and an almost irrational surge of fighting spirit, Jake decides to stop waiting for the legal system and starts doing his own desperate investigation, returning to the original scene of the crime, the obscure service entrance of the Park Slope brownstone where he first found Lilly. He manages to discreetly talk to a maintenance worker who remembers the day of the package, and the worker, hesitant but sympathetic to Jake's palpable distress, shares a crucial, strange piece of information. The brownstone is not owned by a private family, but by a shell corporation registered in Delaware, and the property has been primarily used as a temporary, high-security holding location for VIP guests and private consignments, suggesting the abandonment was highly organized and professional, not a desperate act of a poor mother. The worker also recalls seeing an unusual woman visiting the property frequently in the weeks leading up to the find, a woman who precisely matches Simone Reed's description, including the distinct, expensive watch on her wrist, creating a chilling connection between the initial abandonment, the mysterious financial aid, and the subsequent custody battle. This revelation immediately complicates the narrative, suggesting that Vance might not be the only powerful player in this dark drama, and that the entire sequence of events, from the abandonment to the lawsuit, was a carefully choreographed set piece. What happened next would shock everyone, because the strange, seemingly minor detail was the first true crack in the foundation of Alara's narrative, forcing Jake to abandon the idea of simple coincidence and confront the terrifying possibility that the saving of Lilly was a targeted, deliberate act for reasons he couldn't yet fathom. The connection between the Park Slope brownstone, the Shell Corporation, Simone Reed's sudden appearance and disappearance, and now Vance's aggressive, well-funded lawsuit solidifies Jake's growing suspicion that his life is not the victim of bad luck, but the subject of a cold, calculated plan. That nothing about Lilly's abandonment was by chance. He spends hours connecting the dots, using the little internet access he can find at public libraries, searching for information on Vance, and discovers that she is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar biotech and pharmaceutical conglomerate, a level of wealth and power that makes her personal interest in a small, abandoned child deeply illogical and highly suspicious, suggesting a motive far beyond simple biological motherhood. He starts to view Alara's lawsuit not as a simple custody claim but as a legal operation designed to quickly and quietly retrieve a highly valuable, potentially proprietary asset, making the entire situation feel less like a human tragedy and more like a corporate extraction. The more he thinks about it, the more he realizes that Simone's timely, anonymous aid was likely designed not to help him, but to keep him stable enough to fight the custody battle, ensuring the case goes public and not simply settled in the shadows. A clear sign that two separate, powerful entities might be pulling the strings. This realization is the emotional and intellectual turning point for Jake, transforming him from a passive victim into an active, though outmatched, detective fighting for his life. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The suspicion that nothing was by chance was about to be confirmed by a reckless mistake of his own making, a momentary lapse in judgment that would provide his enemies with the final ammunition they needed to silence him permanently. Driven by his desperation to gather evidence and confirm his suspicions, Jake makes a critical, reckless error, an impulsive attempt to meet with Simone Reed again, using the only lead he has, the faint memory of her unique, expensive car model and license plate digits, hoping to confront her directly about her connection to the brownstone and Alara Vance. He manages to locate a car matching the description parked in an exclusive parking garage downtown and, in a moment of sheer folly, attempts to leave a handwritten note on the windshield demanding answers, failing to realize the car is equipped with a sophisticated, motion-activated security camera that records his face, his movements, and his frantic, poorly concealed attempt to investigate. The security footage is immediately forwarded to Alara Vance's legal team, who, knowing exactly who Jake is and what he's searching for, expertly manipulate the footage to portray his actions not as a desperate search for the truth, but as harassment, stalking, and intimidation of a key witness, Simone, painting him as volatile and unstable. This error provides Alara's lawyer with the perfect, clean ammunition needed for the next court hearing, allowing them to file an immediate motion for a permanent protective order against Jake, further restricting his already limited access to Lilly and making his attempt to question anyone connected to the case a direct violation of a court order. This small, crucial mistake not only worsens his legal standing but also completely validates the narrative that he is the dangerous, unhinged element in this scenario. At that moment, everything started to change, because his single act of desperation to find the truth has inadvertently given his powerful adversary the final tool necessary to close the legal door on his life, ensuring the next court appearance would be a devastating formality. The great lie is officially delivered in the courtroom during a devastating preliminary hearing where Alara Vance's lawyer presents the manipulated security footage of Jake at the garage, using it as proof of his unstable and obsessive behavior, completely twisting his desperate search for the truth into a pattern of criminal harassment. But the true, gut-wrenching moment of betrayal comes when Simone Reed is called to the witness stand as a surprise witness for Alara's side. A move that stuns Jake and the pro bono lawyer. Simone, polished and composed, proceeds to tell a meticulously crafted, devastating lie under oath. She testifies that the money she gave Jake was not an investment, but a pity payment to placate a disturbed, aggressive man who had been demanding payment for the trouble he caused, completely reversing her earlier narrative and confirming the legal team's portrayal of Jake as a manipulative mercenary. The betrayal is total. The one person who offered him hope and stability now uses that very act to destroy his character and his case, effectively closing the last door to his defense and confirming that she was a paid plant working for the opposition all along. This deliberate, calculated deception crushes Jake's spirit, replacing his hope with a bitter, raw sense of foolishness and making him realize he was manipulated and set up from the very beginning. What happened next would shock everyone, because the betrayal was not just a legal maneuver. It was a deeply personal, psychological attack designed to leave Jake emotionally gutted and completely isolated, setting the stage for his most profound emotional collapse yet, making him question the very basis of his initial, selfless decision to help. The combined weight of the courtroom betrayal, the protective order, and the near certainty of losing Lilly permanently triggers Jake's strongest emotional collapse, a raw, private moment of agony that unfolds back in the cold, empty solitude of his van. He breaks down completely, a man stripped of his child, his home, his job, and now his belief in basic human decency, weeping silently with a profound, consuming grief that is both painful and cathartic for the viewer. This is the moment where all the accumulated stress, injustice, and betrayal finally overwhelm him, and he questions, for the first time with genuine conviction, whether he did the wrong thing, wondering if Lilly would have been better off left in the system than dragged through this terrifying, unjust war of attrition. He pulls out Lily's crayon drawing, and the contrast between her pure, childlike hope and the crushing reality of his failure is a heartbreaking visual juxtaposition, and he momentarily considers destroying the drawing, wanting to erase the memory of the happiness that was so brutally taken from him. He feels a deep, soul-crushing sense of failure, not as a defendant, but as a father, believing he has actively harmed the child he sought to protect. But he had no idea this was only the beginning, because even in this absolute nadir of his emotional life, a silent, almost accidental clue, missed in his grief, was about to be revealed. A small thread of truth that would force him to pull himself out of the darkness and restart the fight on an entirely new, much more dangerous and high-stakes battlefield. The news of the protective order and the judge's heavily biased comments about Jake's erratic behavior leak into the small social circle he once maintained, primarily through the highly sensationalized reporting of a small-time local gossip blog that Alara's team discreetly fed information to, making him a pariah in his own neighborhood. His former coworkers and acquaintances, already skeptical after the public shaming, now actively avoid him on the street, crossing to the other side or pretending not to see him, completely accepting the narrative that he is a deranged stalker who somehow tried to capitalize on a wealthy woman's personal tragedy, compounding his failure with social isolation. Even his only friend, the sympathetic dispatcher Jessica, stops returning his desperate calls, fearful of being associated with a man facing legal action involving CPS and a protective order, a fear that is a painful symbol of how quickly society abandons the accused, regardless of the truth. He becomes a ghost in his own city, unable to sit in public without feeling the cold, silent judgment of strangers who have only read the manipulated headlines, the alienation confirming that Alara's campaign was not just legal but a highly effective, character-assassinating public relations assault. This estrangement is the final, painful step in his isolation, leaving him with no emotional refuge. At that moment, everything started to change because the pain of social rejection, as deep as it was, paradoxically freed him from the burden of worrying about public perception, forcing him to focus his entire, singular energy on finding the truth, now having nothing left to lose by taking extreme, unconventional risks. Jake is now completely and utterly alone, physically camping out in his dilapidated van, legally silenced by the protective order, professionally blacklisted by his job loss, and emotionally separated from everyone he cares about, a single man against the full, terrifying might of a billionaire's legal and financial apparatus. He has no money, no home, no counsel willing to take his case on short notice, and, most agonizingly, no physical access to his daughter, forcing him into a state of deep, singular solitude that either breaks a man or forces him to transcend his limitations. The silence in the van is no longer just empty. It is a vacuum that forces him to confront his own mistakes and the hard, unyielding truth of the world. He realizes that if he is to win, he must operate completely outside the system, a rogue agent of justice. The only thing he possesses now is the burning, unshakable conviction that he saved Lilly, and that Alara Vance is lying. A conviction that becomes the sole fuel for his entire existence. He stops shaving, his clothes become more worn, and his appearance reflects the raw, desperate state of his internal world. What happened next would shock everyone, because the very solitude that was meant to destroy him now becomes his greatest strength, allowing him to observe, analyze, and plan without the interference of fear, doubt, or external opinion, turning him into a formidable, though underestimated, adversary. Operating in complete, desperate silence, Jake begins his real, effective investigation, completely divorced from the constraints of legality or social approval. He uses the final few dollars he has to buy cheap burner phones and prepaid internet access, carefully monitoring public records and social media related to Alara Vance and her biotech company, moving through the city like a quiet, invisible ghost. He develops a meticulous, almost obsessive routine of cross-referencing public statements made by Alara about her family life with the information he gathered about the Shell Corporation brownstone and the timing of Lily's abandonment, looking for the smallest contradiction or anomaly. The significant breakthrough comes when he finds an obscure, months-old press release from Alara's company detailing a highly secretive, multi-million-dollar personal health initiative that had suddenly and quietly been shut down immediately after Lilly's abandonment, a project that was rumored to involve groundbreaking, highly personalized gene therapy. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence, planting the terrifying idea that Lilly's value to Alara might be scientific or proprietary, not merely maternal, making her a package that needed to be retrieved quickly and quietly. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The silent change was the beginning of his true mission, transforming him from a simple father into a detective uncovering a corporate conspiracy that would require a new, unexpected kind of alliance to bring to light. Just as Jake is about to send his inconclusive findings to a generic investigative journalist tip line, a new, unexpected ally emerges from the shadows of his life. Jessica, his former dispatcher, who unexpectedly tracks him down after seeing him sleeping in his van and, racked with guilt over her own earlier estrangement, decides to risk her job and reputation to help him. Jessica reveals that, out of loyalty to Jake, she had kept copies of all his original delivery manifests and recorded all communications on the day he found Lilly, including the garbled, urgent messages from the special projects team that assigned the brownstone delivery, proof that the entire assignment was irregular and orchestrated from the beginning. More critically, Jessica is highly skilled in logistics and communications, and she uses her technical access and knowledge of the corporate network to quietly monitor and intercept internal communications from Alara Vance's company, confirming that the company is actively tracking the custody case and referring to Lilly by a code name, Project Nightingale. The most damning piece of information she intercepts is a private, coded communication between Simone Reed and Alara's CFO, revealing Simone is not just a witness but the actual head of security for Alara Vance's foundation, completely confirming her role as a manipulative plant and securing an official material confirmation of the betrayal. At that moment, everything started to change, because Jake was no longer completely alone. He had a new, determined ally with the technical skills and inside knowledge necessary to gather the indisputable, professional-grade evidence required to crack the corporate conspiracy and finally defeat the ruthless power arrayed against him. With Jessica's help providing the technical backbone and critical internal data, Jake now has the capacity to transform his suspicions into verifiable facts, and together they meticulously assemble a damning narrative of corporate manipulation and scientific cover-up. They discover a series of highly encrypted emails indicating that Lilly was not a child born out of a simple, tragic affair, but the result of an experimental, highly secretive gene therapy trial conducted by Alara's company, designed to create a medical breakthrough for a rare genetic marker that Alara Vance herself carried, making Lilly a scientific marvel and, critically, the intellectual property of the corporation. The abandonment was a panicked reaction to a minor, temporary health scare that made the baby a legal liability just before a major corporate audit, intended to be a temporary parking of the child until the legal and financial environment was safe to retrieve her. A shocking confirmation that Lilly's life was always treated as a corporate asset. This undeniable truth, that Lilly's biological value, not maternal love, was the motive, is the core revelation of the story, transforming the custody battle from a domestic dispute into a high-stakes corporate crime drama. Realizing the evidence is too explosive to simply present in a single courtroom, Jake and Jessica decide the truth must be leaked to a major national news outlet to guarantee safety and public pressure. What happened next would shock everyone, because the leaking of this truth immediately puts them in direct, physical danger, forcing the past to violently return to the present as Alara Vance's security team realizes their carefully constructed wall of silence has been breached. The past violently explodes into the present the moment Jake and Jessica upload the encrypted files to the New York Times investigations desk. Within hours, they receive an immediate, chilling message on the burner phone. A single picture of the front of the brownstone, but this time, the picture includes a close-up of the maintenance worker who gave Jake the original tip being aggressively questioned by two of Alara's security detail, a clear and terrifying demonstration that the opposition knows they are actively investigating and is willing to use intimidation to silence anyone associated with them. This threat is confirmation that their lives are in imminent danger, forcing Jake to confront the fact that his fight is no longer just legal, but a desperate race for survival. The most critical piece of the past that rises to the surface is Jake's own vulnerability. Alara's legal team, in a desperate, last-ditch attempt to discredit him before the story breaks, releases a private, highly sensitive police report from years ago concerning Sarah's fatal accident, subtly suggesting he was somehow culpable, an old wound weaponized to destroy his credibility completely, proving that Alara has investigated every painful corner of his life. Jake realizes that every action he took, every sacrifice, every moment of weakness, has been documented and weaponized. What happened next would shock everyone, because he now stands at the absolute precipice. The world is about to hear the truth, but his adversary has a counter-narrative ready that could destroy him forever, demanding a final, impossible choice that will define his morality and his future. The ultimate test of Jake's character arrives just hours before the New York Times is set to publish the explosive investigation, when he receives a final, secret communication from Alara Vance herself, bypassing her lawyers, offering a cruel, yet almost irresistible, ultimatum. She will drop the custody case immediately, sign all adoption papers over to him, and give him a multi-million-dollar, anonymous settlement that will secure his and Lilly's future forever, if and only if he immediately pulls the leaked evidence, allowing her corporate secrets to remain buried and leaving her crimes unexposed. This is the moral Everest of the story, the final, agonizing temptation. The guaranteed, secure return of his daughter and unimaginable wealth, exchanged for the ultimate silence and the sacrifice of the greater justice. He is physically and emotionally exhausted, and the allure of ending the struggle, of securing Lily's future without any further risk, is almost overwhelming. He thinks about the cold nights in the van, the public shaming, the isolation, and the promise of a life of ease where he never has to worry about rent again. He is alone with his conscience and the burner phone, facing the most profound choice of his life: personal gain and security, or the difficult, dangerous path of truth and justice for an unknown number of people potentially affected by Alara's corporate secrets. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. The ultimate victory required him to reject the easy path and choose the moral high ground, a choice that would instantly trigger the final, catastrophic confrontation with the full might of his adversary. With a shaking but determined hand, Jake texts a single, decisive word back to Alara Vance. No. He refuses the guaranteed security, the vast wealth, and the quiet return of his daughter, choosing instead the terrifying, uncertain path of exposing the truth. Knowing this choice means he will face the full, unbridled fury of a billionaire CEO and risk losing Lilly again in the ensuing legal and public chaos. His decision is based on a simple, profound realization. If Lily's life was treated as an asset by Alara Vance, his silence would only perpetuate the injustice and potentially harm other future victims of the corporation's reckless science, and he cannot teach his daughter that justice is negotiable for money. He contacts the Times editor, confirming the story's release and adding a final, personal statement about the importance of holding power accountable, ensuring his identity as the source is irrevocably tied to the explosive revelation. This act of profound moral courage is the true victory of his character arc, transforming him from a victim fighting for his own child into a champion of justice fighting against systemic corruption. At that moment, everything started to change because his final rejection of the easy way immediately triggers the massive, global response to the published story, turning a private custody battle into a national scandal and ensuring that the consequences of his actions will be immediate, far-reaching, and completely beyond Alara's control. The first, profound reward for his moral conviction is immediate and overwhelming. The New York Times article breaks globally, detailing Alara Vance's secret gene therapy project, the corporate shell game, the manipulation of the legal system, and, critically, the intentional, cold-blooded abandonment of the infant, complete with the intercepted communications provided by Jake and Jessica. The public outcry is instantaneous and massive, focusing a harsh, unforgiving spotlight on Alara Vance and her conglomerate, forcing government regulators and federal prosecutors to immediately launch formal investigations, completely validating Jake's narrative. More importantly, the judge overseeing the custody case, under intense public and ethical scrutiny, immediately reverses the protective order and, in a dramatic emergency hearing, awards Jake temporary, unsupervised custody of Lilly, citing the overwhelming evidence of Alara's egregious misconduct and misrepresentation of the facts. The reunion scene, though temporary, is the emotional peak of the story. Jake walking into the foster home, the caseworker silently nodding him through, and Lilly running into his arms. Their emotional embrace confirming that love and truth have, for the moment, triumphed over greed and power. But he had no idea this was only the beginning. This initial victory was merely the foundation for the total collapse of Alara Vance's empire, paving the way for the full, deserved justice and the massive financial turnaround that was still to come, ensuring the struggle was not just for the child, but for the life he was owed. The full financial reversal begins almost immediately as the public scandal causes a catastrophic plunge in the stock value of Alara Vance's biotech company, wiping out billions in corporate wealth and attracting a slew of class action lawsuits and civil suits from shareholders and ethics organizations. However, Jake's most personal and immediate financial reward comes from an unexpected source. His former colleague and ally Jessica, using her knowledge of the company's inner workings and the damning evidence they gathered, secures him a high-powered, pro bono legal team specialized in whistleblowing and corporate crime, ready to fight the final custody battle and pursue compensatory damages. This legal team files a massive civil suit against Alara Vance, citing emotional distress, defamation, and malicious prosecution, leveraging the public outrage and the incontrovertible proof of Alara's deceit. Furthermore, the news outlet, in a gesture of appreciation for the high-impact story and to support his legal fight, discreetly provides Jake with a substantial legitimate fund for his and Lilly's immediate needs, ensuring he is finally stable and able to secure a safe, comfortable apartment and excellent care for Lilly, ending his homelessness and poverty. At that moment, everything started to change, because the world was finally repaying him for his sacrifice, beginning the complete, deserved transformation of his life from one of desperate struggle to one of secure, respected stability, setting the stage for the final revelation that would put all the pieces of the mystery into terrifying context. The final, shattering revelation that connects every piece of the complex mystery comes during the civil trial, where Alara Vance, now facing criminal charges and corporate collapse, is forced to admit the full truth under cross-examination about the entire orchestration of the events. Alara tearfully confesses that Simone Reed was not just her head of security, but her older sister, a brilliant, ruthless operative who had managed the entire Project Nightingale and the subsequent cover-up with terrifying efficiency, acting as Alara's ruthless proxy and confidant for years. Alara further reveals that the black sedan following Jake, the anonymous money, and the staged betrayal were all Simone's desperate, highly calculated attempts to control the flow of the narrative. The initial help was to ensure Jake kept the baby long enough for Alara to retrieve her, and the later betrayal was a failed attempt to destroy his credibility once he became a legal threat. The ultimate shocker is Alara's admission that the Park Slope brownstone was not just a holding place, but their childhood home, and that Simone had orchestrated the baby's abandonment there as a deeply cynical nod to their own family's history of personal abandonment issues, turning the whole operation into a warped, personal tragedy played out on a corporate stage. This revelation transforms Simone from a cold accessory to a key antagonist, driven by a twisted loyalty and a deep-seated desire to protect her sister's corporate empire at any cost, regardless of the human lives she destroyed. What happened next would shock everyone, because the full public confession of the sisters' dark involvement was the final act of justice, paving the way for the total, deserved closure that Jake and Lilly desperately needed. The story concludes with a final, deeply emotional scene years later, a picture of complete, earned peace and justice. Alara Vance is sentenced to significant prison time for corporate fraud and obstruction of justice, and her empire is completely dismantled, a complete victory for accountability. Crucially, the final custody hearing grants Jake full, legal adoption and sole custody of Lilly, officially and permanently cementing their bond in the eyes of the law, a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph over injustice. The final scene shows Jake and Lilly, now about 10 years old, vibrant and happy, not in the confines of a New York apartment, but walking hand in hand near a beautiful, small house with a white picket fence in a quiet, sun-drenched suburb outside of Philadelphia, a nod to the American dream he lost and now reclaimed, a place he was able to purchase with the substantial civil settlement he won. Lilly is now known by her adopted, full name, Lilly Marshall, and the focus is on a normal, happy life, bike riding, planting a small garden, and simply being a secure family. Jake's eyes, though still carrying the shadow of the past, now radiate a deep, profound peace and gratitude. The camera slowly focuses on Jake, watching Lilly play, and he realizes that the act of saving Lilly was not a burden or a mistake, but the single most defining, heroic, and financially rewarding action of his life. an act of true selflessness that was repaid with the ultimate prize: a family, security, and true justice. The final shot is a close-up of Lilly's happy, secure face, knowing that the man who found her in the darkness became the light that saved her forever. An ending designed to make the audience feel the full, cathartic weight of the emotional journey and the well-deserved victory. If this powerful story of resilience, justice, and a father's ultimate sacrifice moved you even a fraction as much as it moved us, please let us know. We fight to bring these true-to-life emotional dramas to you every week, and we need your support to keep the fight going. Smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of raw, unbelievable justice. And tell us, in the comments below, where are you watching this story from? We love seeing our community grow across the country.